Okay, time for yin today. Let's come on to our mats and we'll start on our backs just to get our breath going, start to settle in. Bring the soles of the feet to the mat and widen the feet. So bring the feet out wide to the outer edges of the mat, knees touch in the center of the mat. And you can bring the arms down by the sides, palms face up, close the eyes, observe how you feel without changing anything. And then place the hands on the body. So bring the left hand on the heart, right hand on the belly. Observe how that feels. Start to take a deeper breath in through the nose. Back out through the mouth, nice and slow. Inhale in through the nose. Back out through the nose. Inhale in through the nose. Lift the belly, then the chest. Slowly back out through the nose. Keep going with this breath on your own. Now that you've layered on the breath, notice what's changed, how you feel, just with a few breaths. Things are starting to slow down, which allows you to become more present in the moment. So you can start to land on your mat. Hitting pause on everything else. Reach the arms overhead, find a stretch. You can interlace the fingers, turn the palms to face away from you. Bring the pinkies down toward the floor, thumbs up toward the sky. So you start to feel a little bit of an opening all the way up through the wrists. Try not to arch the back too much. And a good way to not do that is to hug the lower front ribs in. So the very lowest ribs. That lower back's still going to be lifted away from the mat. You want to keep that natural curve there. Switch the interlacing of the fingers, one finger over, keep pressing out through the hands. And release the arms down by the sides, heel toe the feet, back to hip width distance. Hug the right knee in toward the chest. Cross the right ankle on top of the left thigh. So it's just like thread the needle. Stay here. Left foot's on the ground. It could come in a little bit closer if you wanted to, or it can go out a little bit further, but let's focus on the right leg. So keep that right foot flexed. Without using the hands, press that right knee away from you. Arms can go down by the sides, palms facing up, or you can stay with left hand on the heart, right hand on the belly. So starting out with a gentle hip opening, you're not bringing the legs in toward the body. We want to keep this as effortless as possible, but you do need to have some effort in that right leg moving away from you so that you do start to open up that right hip. And you can feel the state of mind that we've created. We're trying to stay in this zone. And when you start to put too much effort into the poses, you step out of that zone. And the hips underneath you, what's touching the mat, you want to feel like that's even. So sometimes we start to rock over to the right hip. See if you can keep an even amount of pressure in the left hip and the right hip. Listening to the sound of your own breath, you should be able to hear it. Ideally, this is a sound that brings you comfort, one you almost always have access to. And if you can't hear it, you should always be able to feel it. Let's set the right foot down onto the mat, starting to switch sides. So left ankle, right thigh, make sure that left foot's flexed. It's always staying flexed whenever we have the knee bent this way. You'll start to gently move that left knee away from you. One other note for comfort, that outer left ankle bone, you don't want it pressing right into the thigh. If you move it over to the right a little bit, you can kind of hook it outside of the thigh, and that gives you a little bit of leverage. Even out the weight on the hips that the weight that's resting on the mat. As you become more relaxed in the pose, keep a little bit of effort in that left knee moving away from you. and start to bring that left foot back down onto the mat. Let's bring the knees in toward the chest. Hang on to the knees with each hand. Open up the knees wide like you're making a big circle, and then push the knees away from you. Bring the knees back together in toward the chest. Open them out wide. Keep going with these circles on your own. Using the hands on the knees will make it so that you don't go too far. The range of motion will be limited. But you're starting to move the femurs around in the hip socket now that you've done it, a gentle hip opening on each side. This is also a hip opening. It's dynamic. Switch the direction of your circles next time you bring the knees in toward the chest. Start to move the knees out away from you, then out wide, back in toward the chest. Keep going. While you're getting into the hips, this is also a nice way to open up the lower back when you're lying down on a flat surface. All right, set the feet back down onto the mat. Roll over to your right side. Bring yourself up to seated. You'll want to locate your bolster if you're using one, or it could be stacked blankets, a pillow, whatever you have. And then as you come to seated, let's take this bolster. You want to bring it underneath the bent legs. So soles of the feet are on the mat in front of the bolster. Hips are behind the bolster, completely on the mat. You'll come back down to lying on your back, leave the soles of the feet on the mat. And we might need to shift the bolster a little bit as we get into it. As we get into this, you'll feel what is most comfortable. So arms can be down by the sides. Keep the feet on the mat. Just bring the soles of the feet together and the knees wide. So knees are ideally landing on the bolster somewhere. Feet are in front of the bolster, and you're in a hip opening here, a shape that we keep playing with. We did half of this and thread the needle. One other option, you're welcome to stay right here. You could take this same shape, bring the feet up on top of the bolster, and that's significantly deeper. Here's where you may need to move the bolster farther away from you, closer to you. So figure out a place if you do want to keep the feet up a little bit higher, adjust the bolster so it's allowing you to just be in the shape without thinking about it. And this is going to build over time, right? The length of our holds makes them more intense. These are longer holds because we're doing a yin practice. So if it turns out that having the feet up isn't a good idea for whatever reason, just bring the feet forward, stay in the same shape, keep the feet on the mat. Arms out by the sides or hands on the body pretty much is always an option for you when you're lying down on the back. And that choice might be a different one each time you end up on your mat. Maybe you go back and forth a lot between the two. When you put a little bit of support with the yoga prop underneath you, or even if you just have the feet on the mat and you're not even using a bolster, you'll start to feel a lengthening of the inner thighs, the groin area, an opening of the hips, and maybe even a nice spreading on the top of the pelvis. Almost like the hip bones are widening, feeling that release. Your hips on the mat start to get a little heavier, along with everything else touching the mat. Trying to stay with our Ujjayi breath as long as possible. And coming back to it as quickly as possible, as soon as we remember. You'll start to wiggle the toes a little bit. If you have your feet up on the bolster, slide them forward. Same shape, but the feet are now on the mat ahead of the bolster. You can feel the difference. Extend the legs forward, reach the arms overhead, just finding a stretch. Bring the knees in toward the chest. You can rock side to side a little bit. Set the feet onto the bolster if you're using one. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring yourself up to seated. This bolster can go off to the side. You'll come to seated with the legs out in front of you. Actually, let's do a cross-legged seat quickly. So come to a cross-legged seat, hands on the knees, and on the exhale, round the spine, chin comes in toward the chest. And on the inhale, lift the chest, arch the spine, maybe gaze up. So seated cat-cow. You can go at your own pace. You don't need to stay with me. You're following the rhythm of your own breath. So the exhale is when you round. Inhale is when you lift the heart up. Eyes could be open or closed. One more cycle. Inhale and exhale. Come back up to seated. Now you will extend the legs out in front of you, but keep a deep bend in the knees. So just your heels are on the mat and your toes are pointing up. And then start to come forward so that the torso rests completely on the knees. You may need to bend the knees even more to make that happen, but torso is completely resting on the knees. Clasp opposite elbows underneath you. Let the head and the neck go. And if you feel like you can straighten the legs a little bit and still keep that connection of the chest on the knees, then you can do that. But we're doing this to bring some space to the lower back. So once you start to lift the torso away from the thighs, you're losing that connection, that space that we're trying to create. You may have found that you weren't feeling much when you first started in this shape. Maybe now you're starting to feel the back open. You can bring the hands to the mat. Slowly start to slide the legs forward so they're straight. Turn the palms to face up and then just keep hanging forward over the legs. So now you're in what we call in yin caterpillar, seated forward fold. And you can feel the difference between having the chest on the thighs and then having the legs straight or straighter. You can still have a bend in the knees if you need one, especially if the back sides of the legs are tight. And if you feel any discomfort in the lower back, come back to the version we were in before, bending the knees, clasping opposite elbows underneath the knees, and letting the torso rest on the thighs. If you're fine here, stay here. And slowly start to come back up to seated. Once you come back up, let's grab a block and a strap if you have one. You could use a towel, a t-shirt, something besides a strap, a belt. The belt of a robe is great. And you'll bring the soles of the feet to the mat, come on down onto your back. We'll use the strap first. So you'll loop the sole of the right foot into the strap. And you want to place the strap at the top of the arch, just below the ball of the foot. Grab both ends of the strap with both hands. Start to bring the leg in toward the body, just enough to where you feel an opening start to happen in the back side of the right leg. That might mean you have a bend in the knee. It might be straight. That's all up to you. When you bring the toes down toward the face and the heel lifts up, you start to get a deeper stretch in the calf, Achilles tendon area, which can feel good. Hands can either let's slide the hands all the way back until the elbows and upper arms are resting down on the mat beside you. Deep inhales in and out through the nose, moving the breath up and down the back of the throat. So left foot's on the mat. Just take a moment to observe the space you have in your lower back. You could play with extending that left leg forward, heel down on the mat. If that takes away space from your lower back, please slide that left foot back in and rest it on the mat. You're still getting into the back side of the right leg either way. So we had a lot of lower back requests today before class, which is why I'm giving so many cues for the lower back. And all of us find discomfort in a variety of ways in the lower back. So what might work for one person may not work for another. So all just choices, and then you listen to the feedback you get from your own body. If you find there's a little bit more space in the back side of the right leg, you could bring it in a little closer. For some of us, the right leg opens up quickly in this pose. Then bring the sole of the left foot to the mat if it's not already there. And let's switch feet. So left foot comes into the strap, right foot comes down to the mat. Start to place the strap top of the arch, just below the ball of the foot. Bring the toes down toward the face, heel lifts up. Figure out if you want to bend that left knee or if it feels better straighter. And then how close you bring the left leg in toward the body. Start with a gentle stretch. As soon as you feel it, just stay there. let that opening happen. And then as soon as it goes away, you start to inch the leg closer to the body. Bring your attention to your lower back. Maybe extend that right leg forward. Notice if anything changes. Did you lose space in the lower back? Is there any discomfort? If so, that right foot comes back in. Maybe the leg comes in a little bit closer to the body. It doesn't have to. Always keeping some tension in the strap. And if you feel like that outer left hip is going up toward the left shoulder, see if you can lower it so it's in line with the right hip. It's the subtlest of adjustments, but it does make a big difference. Bring the sole of the right foot to the mat if it's extended out. Set the strap off to the side. Bring the knees in toward the chest. You can rock side to side if you'd like. Set the feet down onto the mat. Here's where you'll need your block. So you want to bring it just outside of the hip. Walk the feet in, press into the heels, lift the hips up high enough so you can bring the block on the lowest height right underneath the hips. Once you get it there, you're just resting the hips on the block, coming into a version of supported bridge. Lift the chest up a little bit so you can get the shoulder blades underneath you, the outer upper arms press down into the mat, palms just face up toward the sky. Look up for a moment just so you can keep the chin away from the chest. And now you can start to close the eyes without moving the head now that you've got it set up. So back of the hips are resting on the mat. There is an arch in the back. So chest is lifted. There's a toning of the belly. Not a lot of effort. All this stuff is light. Shoulders are heavy, pressing down into the mat. Back of the head's resting on the mat. Feet are also pressing down into the mat, not as hard as you can, but just enough to know that your knees are pointing straight forward. Smooth out the breath. Heels are underneath the knees, so you don't want the feet to be far out ahead of you. You can press into the feet, lift the hips up, maybe move the block to the medium height, the wide way underneath the hips. See how that feels. If it's a difficult transition, then you're probably best to just stay on the lowest height. If it's easy to get there and it feels okay, then stay there. You might need to lift the chest up again now that you've changed the height of the hips. Everything else stays the same. And with the hips resting on the block, the lower back is free, not touching the block. Start to press into the feet, lift the hips up, lower the block one height. So we're all on the lowest height with the block if you're using one. Feel the difference in the height between the block on the medium height and the block on the lowest height. Make sure the hips are even on the block. Chest is still lifted, still a light arch in the spine. Try sliding one leg out in front of you. So heel resting down on the mat, toes pointing up, but the legs relaxed. You're not pushing out through the foot at all. Might be a nice opening on the top of the hip. Make sure your lower back's okay with it. Try extending the other leg out. So both legs out, chest is still lifted a little bit, tail's going toward the heels. So that keeps that lower back long. You're still in a back bend, but we've changed the shape of the legs. Legs are open, hips are more open. So hopefully that gives you an easier time relaxing that area of the body. Start to walk the feet back in underneath the knees, coming back to your supported bridge. Block still underneath you. Press into the feet, lift the hips up, slide the block out from underneath you, set the hips down onto the mat. Rest here, feel the difference. When you first put that block underneath the hips, it doesn't really feel like you're going that high, but once you start working your way down, you can feel the difference, how the spine has to shift, how the whole body adjusts, and how your energy starts to go up as the hips go up and starts to come down as the hips go down. Hug the right knee in toward the chest. Leave that left foot where it is. So now you're widening the space across the lower back. Switch sides. Right foot goes down to the mat. Left knee comes in. Set the left foot down onto the mat. Roll over to your right side. Use the hands to bring yourself up to seated. Once you get to seated, a bolster would be nice. Pillow would even work. You want to bring it the long way in front of you. Bring the knees to the left. So you're on the right hip. Right hip is completely down on the mat and the bolster is just going out ahead of you. Walk the hands forward so that the hands are on each side of the bolster. Slide that bolster back so it's touching the right hip. Then you'll come down onto the bolster. So come down onto the forearms. Before you put the head down, keep it lifted. See what it's like to turn the head to the right and rest the head down onto the bolster. If it's too much for the neck, lift the head, turn it the other way, and you're looking in the same direction as the knees. And maybe you start one way and change during the hold. That's fine. If you have the head turned all the way around, lift it, turn it the other way so the nose and the knees are going in the same direction, just long enough so we can feel a release on the neck from that twist. Start to walk the hands in so you can press down firmly on the mat to lift the chest head away from the bolster. Looking down at the bolster in the hands, bring the right hand over to the left so both hands are on the same side of the bolster. Turn around so you're facing away from the bolster. Hips are down on the mat. Bring this right hand over to the left. Knees come over to the left. And now you're on that left hip. Left hand goes outside of the bolster, both hands on the mat, bolster all the way up against this left hip. Slowly start to lower the chest down, elbows down to the mat. Maybe before you lower the head, look to the left. See what it's like to rest the right side of the head down on the bolster. That feels good. Stay there. You know you can change it whenever you want.
And if you have the head turned all the way around, lift it, left side of the head, rest down onto the bolster. You can feel the unraveling of the spine and the neck, maybe even the upper back. Start to walk the hands in on the mat, press the head and the chest up and away from the bolster. Set the bolster off to the side. So come to hands and knees. No props for this one. You want to make sure the top of your mat, also the width across the mat's totally free for this next pose. You'll come down onto your stomach, almost like Sphinx pose, but we're just using this as a transition. So bring the left arm out to the side and then look at the left hand. You want it in line with the shoulder. So not higher than the shoulder, not lower than the shoulder, right in line. So you're going to put weight on this. So it's important to have that alignment. Look to the right, rest the left side of the head onto the mat. Bring the right hand to the mat. So I have it right in front of my chest, underneath the shoulder, somewhere around there is most supportive. And then you'll bring the legs together, roll back onto this left shoulder. So the right hip will start to lift away from the mat. All of us have a different level of mobility in this left shoulder and where our stretch starts to happen. You're just going to where it begins. It'll deepen over time. So once you find it, stay there. It might mean that your right hip is lifted away from the mat, but it's still going down toward the mat. If that's the case, you can bring that right foot, stagger it in front of the left foot, and that'll give you a little bit more support. If your hips are more stacked and the right hip's on top of the left hip, maybe it just feels good to stack the feet. So it's like you have one long leg back behind you, or maybe you step the right foot back. You can keep both legs straight and just stagger the feet. Some people like to bring the sole of the right foot to the mat, pointing the knee up. And that's a little bit of a hip opening. You can see if that feels like a natural option. But the head's resting down on something. If it doesn't touch the mat, that's when you want to use a pillow or a blanket. Otherwise, the neck will be doing too much work. And the goal of this is really to get into the upper body. So don't be too focused on the lower body. The lower body, we're just trying to find a position of the legs that we can rest in. To roll back onto your stomach, coming out of it, and we'll set up for the other side. So right arm goes out to the right. Make sure you get the hand in line with the right shoulder. Look to the left, Rest the right side of the head down onto the mat. Left hand on the mat, somewhere underneath the shoulder by the chest. And then start to roll back onto this right shoulder. See where you get the best opening on the right side, and then figure out the legs after. So the hips are down toward the mat, left foot can go forward, and that gives you a little bit room to ease up in the pose and rest. Maybe the feet stack. Maybe the left toes go back behind the right foot a little bit. Maybe sole the left foot feels good on the shoulder opening. So priority is the shoulder opening. It might not be the same variation on both sides, right? Sometimes our shoulders need different things. So you're looking for a similar sensation on each side, which could look different. Start to roll back onto your stomach. Bring the hands to the mat. Come up to hands and knees. We'll do one last pose before Shavasana. Take your blocks. You could also use a bolster. You could either bring the bolster the wide way out in front of you, or two blocks on the lowest height, about shoulder width distance apart. So I have mine closer to the outer edges of the mat. Hands go up onto the bolster or the blocks, but see how far back my shoulders are? You want the whatever you have the hands on to be way out in front of you. Big toes together, separate the knees, sit back for child's pose. Hands are lifted with whatever's underneath them, blocks or a bolster. As you sit back, forehead can come down to the mat. So this is a deeper upper body opening. If it's too much, do your standard child's pose with the hands down on the mat. That's great too. This one, though, is gentler on the lower back because the chest isn't dipping down or because of the way the spine's staying long. So you can feel how long the spine is. There isn't as much rounding, and there also isn't as much of an opportunity for the belly to fall down between the thighs. You should have the outer edges of the rib cage resting on the thighs. You need that support. And if all that's still bothering you, could still do this with the knees together. So inner thighs touching, and then the whole torso is resting on the thighs. That's another option too, if you're really struggling with discomfort in the lower back in this shape. You want the sides of the neck to feel long. That's an adjustment with the shoulders. Also, the forehead resting on the mat. Start to lift the head up enough so you can bring the hands and the forearms back down to the mat. If you're using blocks, you'll still use them for Shavasana. So shift forward to hands and knees. Take your blocks, bring them up on the tallest height, still keeping them the same distance they were. So just in from the outer edges of the mat. Then you'll come to seated, blocks are in front of you. Take your bolster, bring that up on top of the blocks. So you're building a bridge here. If you're not using props and you're practicing at home and you have furniture around, you could use a chair, a sofa, a bed, even if it's the right height. So sit to the side. You'll bring the side of the body as close as you can to this bolster or whatever you're using, and then bring the legs up onto the bolster. Here's where you can see if the blocks are too far apart and you feel like the whole thing's going to collapse. Maybe start to scoot the hips more forward. We're trying to get the thighs vertical. So you don't want the hips to go too far back with a big slant in the thighs. And maybe as you come down onto your back, you can bring the hips a little bit closer. So feet are floating. They're not touching the ground, arms down by the sides. And this is a great Shavasana for the lower back. You feel all that space that's happening. There's that widening. You're not taking away anything that the lower back needs. Close the eyes, palms face up, let the chest fall open. This is Shavasana. Rest easy. Let go of that breath control. And be right here, right now. Start to wiggle the fingers and the toes. Bring the hands on the body, left hand on the heart, right hand on the belly. Feet come up on top of the bolster, bending the knees. And roll over to one side. Be careful of the bolster and the blocks. Use the hands to bring yourself up. You're coming to a comfortable seat to close your practice, but one where you have a tall spine, good posture, chest is lifted and open. Bring the hands together in front of you. Bow the head. Honor and acknowledge your heart and spirit, as well as everyone around you. Bring the head back up, blink open the eyes. Namaste. Thanks so much for joining. Hope your lower back feels better than when you started. Some of those things, you can do whenever you want to. You don't, when you're at home or on a trip or wherever you are in the world. All right. See you next time.